Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the Hive Think Tank webinar series. So my name is Olivia. I'm the operations manager at the Hive in Silicon Valley, and we're super excited to have all of you join us and hear from our amazing expert panel speakers from Hidden Layer, Cranium, KPMG, Protect AI, and March Capital. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly go over some of today's best practices for the webinar and explain what the Hive Think Tank does. And then I'll pass it over to Ravi, the Hive's founder and managing director, to talk more about the Hive and introduce our speakers today. So we do love questions, and we would love for the audience to use the Q&A button and not the general chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask the presenters any questions, which they'll do so kind of throughout the events and also at the end of the panel discussion. And this is also being recorded and will be available to view later on our YouTube channel, which I'll link down below in the chat. So the Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of thought leaders, corporations, and entrepreneurs. We're an event and content platform with a focus on AI, cybersecurity, future work, fintech, and so much more. We do host events almost every other week on cutting edge topics in technology and business. So I'm going to share the meetup group in the chat after this, but we'd love for you to stay up to date and join the group. And we have just like another event coming up next week, which Ravi will share more details about. So lastly, I want to thank our sponsors, Avanta Ventures and Gamuda, for their support. And if anyone is interested in getting involved with the Hive Think Tank, feel free to reach out to me directly and make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. So let me go ahead and pass it over to Ravi.
Thank you, Olivia. So the Hive is an early stage fund focused on leveraging data and AI across a variety of different areas, and especially cybersecurity. In addition to our presence here in Palo Alto to cover kind of US and North America, we have separate funds in different parts of the world. Next slide, please. So we have two different series that are going on. The Hive Think Tank is a thought leadership forum that's part of the Hive, the Hive being an early stage venture fund. So we have two series going on currently, one around generative AI, and you can see sort of we've covered a number of topics in this area today. We'll talk more about it, but the topic today is AI security. And in parallel, we are hosting a series of events around the future of work. Next, please. So our next event is next Wednesday, October 11th. And this is going to also be an online Zoom event. And we are excited to have SAP, UiPath, Sonnet.io, and a customer who happens to be using all these vendor solutions. The topic is around transform business process and digital transformation, and a particular methodology around small projects, incremental projects, leveraging both kind of teams within the company and external teams. So I hope you all can join. This is going to be an exciting event. Next slide, please. I'm excited to introduce my colleague from March Capital. March is a related entity to the Hive, a later stage and growth stage venture capital firm. Jed Lighthizer covers security in addition to a number of other areas. And I'm excited to have all these different, I'll call them pioneers of this area. And in the course of today's conversation, you'll hear about kind of what are the kind of issues that fall under, what are the kind of threats that fall that AI exposes. Is AI security a category? Where is the budget coming from? And so on and so forth. Please use the Q&A button below to ask your questions. And I'll hand it over to Jed.
Awesome. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Ravi, for that warm intro. Welcome, everyone. Jed Lighthizer here, partner at March Capital. Really excited to be with you today. As mentioned, we're going to have a very topical conversation on AI security. I think it's an area that's attracted a lot of interest across stakeholders, commercial, startups, investors, government, even more so. And it generates a fair amount of confusion. I think when think about security, a big question is what part should be prioritized? Certainly, how do you protect it? And then with companies itself, I imagine, how much do they use AI now versus have a rigorous governance process first, realizing there's a spectrum there. I think all that makes for an incredibly exciting and interesting and meaty conversation today. And I imagine as AI evolves, security must evolve with it. My hope today is that we educate the audience and we dispel some of the confusion that's out there, realizing that the panelists bring different perspectives to this conversation. And so we'll try to make it interactive. Ravi mentioned use the Q&A function ultimately, and hopefully we'll leave you with a better understanding of how to secure AI and what the challenges and obstacles and really opportunities are. So that's the intro. I think let's jump into it. Tito, you're on the left side of my screen here. We'd love to have you give an introduction of yourself and what brings you here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Jed, thank you so much. And Ravi and Olivia, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel today. Everyone, my name is Chris Tito. I go by Tito. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO at Hidden Layer. It's a cybersecurity organization dedicated to protecting artificial intelligence assets. And, I came up as a reverse engineer and then started running cybersecurity teams and ultimately data science teams at companies like Cylance, Agari, Qualys. Then we founded Hidden Layer about in early 2022. And so really excited to share more and help sort of shine a spotlight and clear up a little bit of the confusion that Jed sort of mentioned earlier, because, I think that there's ways that we can help everyone look at this problem and help clean it up. So I'm excited to share more about that today.
Thank you. Jonathan, I'll go next to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jed, and thanks, everyone. My name is Jonathan Dambrot. I am the CEO and co-founder of Cranium. So we spun this business out of KPMG Studio in March and came out of stealth in April. And we incubated the business inside of KPMG over about a 2.5-year period, thinking about AI security from the perspective of AI systems that we were seeing in some of the largest organizations in the world, how they were managing these, and frankly, the lack of visibility and monitoring and security awareness around how people were using both enterprise and Gen AI systems. And so this is a really great conversation. Actually, some people think like competitors can't discuss these things. We actually have all met together and we support this industry, and we look forward really to having a conversation that allows us to solve this really big problem together and as a community. So I'm really excited to be here. And really looking forward to the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Katie, you're next here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jed. Hey, everybody. I'm Katie Boswell. I lead our AI security services at KPMG. Feel very fortunate to have joined up with Jonathan as he was going through stealth within KPMG and incubating Cranium, and that set me up well to lead our services. So helping our clients think about how to establish and maintain trust in their AI solutions. So everything from the strategy and governance down to double clicking into security and the implementation of tooling in support of that. Glad to be here today.
Awesome. And Ian, last but not least.
I'm last. What's going on here? All right. I've been in the machine learning world for about 15 years. I've seen the adoption and the growth of AI firsthand, having led some of the biggest AI organizations in the world, from Amazon, Oracle, helped pioneer the MLOps space in my previous company, datascience.com. Today, I'm the CEO of Protect AI. And like my friends and colleagues here, Tito and Jonathan, our mission, is very similar, which is we want to help build a safer AI-powered world. And we're doing that by giving products that are really solutions to drive security and best practices across governance, risk, and compliance. And the core areas of our product are, let's give visibility, auditability, and security across all of our ML systems and our AI applications. This is an area that's been overlooked for quite some time within security. This threat surface, it's different, it's big, and the opportunity here for threat actors is massive, and we must protect AI commensurate to the value that it delivers.
Awesome. Thank you for that context. I think one important thing, and maybe Katie, I'll start with you here. Can you help us set the stage? I mean, if we take a look at some of the enterprises out there, what are they doing with AI? Are they implementing it now? Are they consuming it, et cetera?
Yeah, I think there's, well, first of all, I think the majority of the organizations that I'm speaking to are pretty new to this space. I mean, you do have some very large organizations, particularly I'm seeing life sciences and financial services organizations that have been using AI longer. They might have maybe a more mature use cases. And then I see organizations that are a little bit newer and they're looking to really take advantage of some of the recent great innovative use cases that are coming out of, in particular, Gen AI. So seeing a pretty big gamut. What's really amazing to me is that whether they are using AI through their third parties or whether they're building up big data science teams internally in order to be able to embrace this. They're all still relatively immature. I've gotten on a call. It was actually one that Jonathan and I were on with a large oil company that had been using AI for quite some time. Got on this great call and started to talk to them about their usage of AI and really understand what they were doing. And they proceeded to, a data scientist proceeded to tell us about how mature their AI use was and how responsible it was. And the security person who happened to be on the line with us on a webinar like this was like visibly shaking their head. No, these parts of the organization had never connected. They were, kind of growing this AI through really a grassroots kind of movement, even though they were using it in a big way, and it was the future of their organization. And so whether it's sort of coming about in this grassroots way or whether it's something that's a little more solidified, we're still seeing a lot of gaps in terms of strategy, governance, and the tooling to support their needs.
I'd like to add something to what you said on the maturity side. It's not so much the maturity of deploying AI and using ML, throughout the organization. The largest companies in the world have been doing this for a while. I've worked with tens of thousands of them that have deployed AI throughout my career. But you're exactly right, and that's the intersection of machine learning and security is immature. That's where we got to get to the place of, truly ML SecOps, of injecting security throughout the ML lifecycle and pulling all these people together. I was meeting with the CISO just last week of one of the biggest pharma companies in the world. And he said, Ian, we're new in our adoption of AI. My response is, no, you're not. You've been doing this for a long time. You just haven't been talking to the groups that have been putting this into practice. The next call, those teams all came together and they said, oh my gosh, you're right. We did not realize this new threat surface that we have. We have to get better about how we're securing this and working alongside these teams.
And Jed, I think I would add one thing there too is, I think there's confusion primarily also because you've seen the historical like ML ops environments and the use of machine learning and deep learning, but now you're seeing Gen AI also, right? So the consumerization of this is driving adoption. If it's, let's say it was 20% adoption rates last year, where like the ML environments, maybe out of 100 models, 2 were going to production. We're now seeing the use of Gen AI very ubiquitously. And, how do you manage that in an enterprise environment where, yeah, there's a data science team and they've been used to building smaller models and potentially publishing that through endpoints that they control to doing something now where they're trying to get, this thing like it's the iPhone and it's all coming in at once and they're driving this. And so I think we're all seeing this happening, and ultimately, this is colliding with some of those more historical kind of ML capabilities. And I think AI is now becoming more of a catch-all phrase for the combination of machine learning, Gen AI, deep learning, and it's coming together. And I think we're certainly seeing that. And there's been a lot of confusion. Like we worked on some work with the ISACs and the GRF, and we posed that to like 20 of these leaders, and they had a very hard time defining what AI was and how to then think about that in their own organization. So it's interesting how it's going so fast, this experimentation.
And if I play some of that back, Ian and Jonathan, one of the things I heard is, yes, there's always a process the last few years, these large enterprises were building, deploying, had ML ops. But at the same time, there has been some changes, right? I mean, I think it's, from what we read at least, and I'm curious if you do the same, is, more senior executives are getting involved, but also there's this worry, whether it's true or not, you tell me, of, shadow IT, shadow AI, other people using and consuming AI. They may not be quite up there. Is that,
Totally.
So it does seem a change, right?
It's completely. And I think we would all agree, like this has been a marked change in the last 11 months, right? If you look at AI security from a prioritization perspective from the CISO organization, 2 years ago, nobody wanted to talk about it. Last year, maybe it was on the top 10 priority list. Come this year, as people have really started to think about, the use of the combination of Gen AI and enterprise AI and how it's coming together. These questions are coming down from boards. They're coming from regulators. They're now coming from all these sources, because that we've gone from basically a linear approach to how AI is being used internally to an exponential growth curve in AI. And we're all feeling that, right? Every single person has access to these tools that are just tremendously powerful, and people are struggling with answering basic questions, even though, as Ian said, they've been building AI systems for years and years and years. These are questions that they just fundamentally haven't answered. And like in financial services, we see this quite a bit, where it was like in model risk management, right? But that model risk team maybe saw 10% of the models. In some cases, it wasn't even AI, and security wasn't even at the table. So like, this is a whole brand new discussion in a lot of cases.
Hey, I'm going to pass this over to Tito, but just make one statement. I just landed from Washington, D.C. an hour ago. I'm here in Seattle. I spent 2 days there. I was meeting in an event with just CEOs and chairman of the board of the biggest companies in the world, from Julie Sweet at Accenture to 5 senators that were in the room. The entire discussion was AI. And the meat of the discussion was risk and security of AI. We're in a moment right now where there is a massive tailwind. The adoption's been happening, like I said, for a while. The barrier of entry of adoption, though, and growth within a company, with large language models has been reduced. But we're in this like massive moment right now of we are moving super fast down the highway of AI. The vehicle is artificial intelligence. The engine is machine learning. LLMs are just making it go faster. And we need to make sure we do the right maintenance, the right security, and it's top of mind for boards and CEOs all around the world.
Yeah, Jed, I think, to help kind of paint the picture on what you had mentioned, one of the things I like to say is, with all the tooling and really ease of use that's becoming really open today, I think it's, sorry about that. I think it's creating a scenario where it's a lot easier to use models. It's a lot easier to deploy them. It's not necessarily any easier to gain any sort of value from them at the moment, but it's not stopping organizations from bringing models in all of the forms that we're talking about across the board. And so it's really creating a scenario where, we use the term shadow AI, as you mentioned, because, even an entry-level developer can go pull a model off Hugging Face to help them do their job. And so, we were talking to a financial institution yesterday that said, we have our cloud pretty well locked down, but I have no idea what models are on laptops just from different, parts of the organization. And so I think that there's these questions that we need to answer. We need to answer, sort of what's at risk, where does that exist, and then is that part of my policy or part of the plan, or is that just what's showing up? And then moving into kind of, now how do I secure this? And I really believe, and I think we've already started framing up the conversation perfectly around this, but I really believe we need to treat it not much differently than we treat other assets and how we secure them. And I think that's, as we mentioned, whether it's on the governance compliance side, like some of the folks have mentioned here, or whether it's I think we're all getting that public blast right there. But it's not just me. I feel a little better having it pop up somewhere else. But I think or whether it's all the way down through like detection and response and taking action on in the way you would in any other asset provided by the organization. But I think that we have a technology, as the guys have mentioned, that's exists for over a decade now, that we've seen organizations taking advantage of. But as soon as we make it easy to interact with it with a prompt and put it up on a website, all of a sudden it really is gaining the world's attention, and we're all realizing, okay, it's time to do something about this. And so it's exciting, but I think we can have a lot of great discussion around what those plans should look like and what that is in terms of risk for an organization.
And let's start. Sorry, go ahead, Katie.
I was just going to say, maybe to add on one thing. I think probably would all agree that this is pretty reminiscent of what we all experienced as, organizations started to look at cloud adoption. I think one of the differences is that we're seeing it pushed down at an executive level. So I'm going out in front of, the CEO is inviting me to talk to all of the direct reports, boards, et cetera, about what all of this means for their business, both from a security and from an enablement standpoint. And I think that's really great, but it puts a strain in the business in a lot of areas in terms of getting the resources ready to be able to adopt this. And I think one of the challenges, probably where I'm sitting, I see challenges around budget. right? These leaders need to educate their peers about why this is an area that they need to spend money and what the risks are, especially when you're talking about LLMs and you're talking about having AI in the hands of people who don't fundamentally understand it. So you're talking about changing things from, you know, training programs right down to the way that individuals work day to day. And in addition to the budget challenges, you're seeing organizations that have to start thinking about how their roles and responsibilities are going to change as they are trying to, you know, adapt and govern AI. So.
I think that brings up an interesting point. I mean, and someone before mentioned like security kind of commensurate with the risk. I mean, what does the threat landscape look like? There's a question here of how does that vary between traditional model deployments and app builds? But maybe Tito, starting with you, what do you see out there?
Yeah, I think that's it's a really important question, and I think it's important to number one, you know, as we talk about kind of responsible AI all the way through AI security day, it's really important not to conflate the two. And when I'm talking about, you know, AI security specifically, I really think it aligns very well with the traditional landscape in terms of motivation. We're just talking about a new medium for accomplishing a lot of those same goals. So when we talk about the threat landscape on the AI side, we're talking about models being, you know, vulnerable at a code level. We're talking about models being, and I'm using model as a general term here, but essentially AI assets being vulnerable at inference time. So, you know, when you have a model that you want your customers or you want the public to interact with, that is inherently exposed as well. And then at the LLM side, we're seeing a lot of the same ways in which you can look for like traditional network threats being in play, where you think about things like prompt abuses, man-in-the-middle attacks, potential data loss at that scope. So, you know, I think the way I like to help the CISOs understand it is really this is a new medium for a lot of the same concerns, a lot of the same, you know, motivations on the monetary side for threat actors, the state actor side, the disruption opportunities. It's really all there. We're just looking at a new technology, and I think it's really important for those to understand that when you think about something like a traditional network or a traditional, you know, executable file like on a Windows device, we have 30 years of developing security infrastructure around those artifacts. None of that exists for models yet today. None of that exists for a lot of the machine learning assets that, and we need to really, like, it takes organizations like the ones on the panel today, as well as buy-in from a lot of the users to understand that all of that that we've decided collectively needs to exist in a modern day infrastructure needs to expand into machine learning as well.
I'd also add, and by the way, I agree with Tito in terms of similar motivations. We see a lot of the same hacker techniques are working in this space. It's just different systems, different tools. And one of the areas that is incredibly vulnerable that our company, Protect AI, has been spending a lot of time on is the supply chain. How are these models being built? And if you look at the supply chain of open source, whether it's libraries, frameworks, packages, to the 350,000 foundational models on Hugging Face, that's very ripe for exploits. And so we have a 10,000 person threat research community called Hunter, HUNTR.com, and we pointed them at the supply chain. And we are finding dozens and dozens every single month of high vulnerabilities to critical vulnerabilities. And what do I mean by that? This is where NIST and MITRE are giving it a 10 out of 10. This is like 0-day moments where somebody through a simple exploit can attack something like the model registry to either steal the models, inject code in the models, and even do a complete cloud takeover. That is just mind-blowing, but yet today's tools, meaning the security incumbents right now, they don't enumerate and they're not able to look for this. And so this is major gaps, but yet to Tito's point, the threat actors are trying to accomplish a lot of the similar stuff that they've been doing for the last couple decades, you know, in exploiting systems. It's just a different ballgame and a different playing field that they're working on.
And Jed, I would also add to that. So I agree with everything that's been said, but I think there's also a lack of maturity in being able to consume some of this today, right? So, you know, you're working in an environment where this tooling doesn't necessarily exist. And so, and the lexicon is brand new, right? So we're talking about things that, you know, people, this may be the very first conversation when you're sitting down with the security team and you're having that discussion. And so, you know, there are definitely issues that are persisting within these environments. And I agree with the supply chain commentary. But I don't think that there's a mechanism to give that visibility today that I think, you know, people expect. So when you talk to the data science team, they point to security and like, oh yeah, our data's secure. You know, our systems have been secured. We spent all this money on all of this stuff over time, and application security. Why doesn't that cover me? And, you know, data security. Why doesn't that cover me? And so I think we're in a position now where we have to now talk about something that is necessary. If you look at some of the key threats, some of those, historical security controls, they don't pick them up, right? So the research shows that, backdoors, there's probably a 2% likelihood that you're going to pick those up with some of the more traditional security capabilities. And being able to look at data poisoning and come up with a mechanism, like they may not be able to consume that today, but being able to provide visibility of what's there from an AI perspective is going to open that discussion between a security team that has not had this in focus, and be able to then bring that into focus. We're seeing a lot of people starting to form governance groups that are led in somewhat like 50% of the time by security organizations, where the operational tasks for both privacy and security are held there. And then other times we're seeing, legal, the chief data officer or AI leaders starting to run those. And then being able to then start to bring together, like, what do we do? We have visibility. How do we start really thinking about what do we want in our environment? Most of these organizations haven't been able to even identify changes in these data sets that would indicate some of these challenges. So they can't even have that discussion yet. So I think it is important to talk about these threats, but I think the level of maturity is still pretty low, and we need to guide these organizations and the community into a place where they can start really feeling more comfortable about it.
And Tito, I see you nodding along. Is that what you're seeing as well?
I do, and I think it's another sort of important topic for us to chat about here, which is the persona side of things, right? Like I think that there's many organizations that sort of have something to say about this problem, whether it be from data science, whether it be from risk or legal, whether it be from cybersecurity. And I think that it's going to be really important for us to take, we've seen new technologies come about, and then all of a sudden they're already in production systems, data pipelines, and then all of a sudden there's an organization's need to secure them. And so I think when we follow those patterns quite a bit, it's important to understand, who needs to be in the room. We're seeing many organizations form tiger teams or groups because there is an element of subject matter expertise requirements from the data science side and the cybersecurity side. And so I think, at Hidden Layer, we're making a little bit more of a bet that it's going to be a cybersecurity responsibility, but there's certainly a need for an input from all of those groups. And I think that is an added layer of complexity that's really creating difficulty in terms of an action plan for some of these organizations, like, who's responsible. And, we sort of joke and say, watch an organization get hacked through a model and see who gets fired. And then, we'll kind of go from there. But really it's a lot of organizations that really require that input from all those places. And for some of these large organizations, like as Katie's mentioned, some of these other pieces, that's not necessarily a conversation that's having every day. There's not always really a mechanism for that kind of communication. So I think it's our job in the community and other sort of stakeholders here to really get everyone to the table that needs to be. And I think some of as Miter was mentioned, a few of the others, they do a great job of that. But we really need to start getting all of the actual decision makers to understand that this is a priority and step it forward.
I think the security guy always gets fired. Just saying.
Exactly. That's why we're making that bet, right?
He's always taking that bullet, or he or she. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
That person's always
taking a look at the various roles. Something that we've seen is ML and AI leadership. They want visibility. They want to be able to audit these systems. They want these systems to be more secure. They're actually welcoming the conversation with security. In past and other areas of security, it's security feeling like, oh my gosh, I'm pushing down a technology that my development teams and certain teams, my infra teams, like, oh my gosh, another product, I don't want to use it. That's not the case that's happening here. What we're seeing is that the ML team sometimes bring us to the table, and we foster that bridge between these security groups and these ML groups, and we help them work together. And it's been a fantastic relationship, and one that they've been wanting for a while. They don't want to sit in the world necessarily of just shadow IT, especially at the world's largest companies. They want to be up-leveled, if you will, to their peers within application development. And they deserve to be, because AI is so critical to the business that it is not an afterthought. It's one of the most important things that companies are working on today. And it must be protected commensurate to the value that it's delivering. They all get that.
Yeah, very well.
That's very well said. But I would add on to say, I've been very impressed with the security leaders that I'm working with, who are really recognizing their role in the broader responsible context. Before I mentioned that, I'm seeing clients, they're really focused on establishing and maintaining trust in these AI systems, because they see that the AI security is really key to meeting their business objectives. If they can't establish trust in these systems, and that is the future of their business, then they have a big problem. And I think they see that that's part of a bigger role that they play, which means that they're, more, I think, inclined to lean into conversations around bias and integrity, and maybe those things don't ultimately sit with them, but they see their role and how critical it is in the broader context.
Yeah, just to add on both of those pieces, I would just throw out there that if the four of us in our organizations are doing our job correctly, we're actually accelerating innovation in the AI world. We're allowing creators and developers to take more risks. We're allowing them to be able to gain access to even more data points because they're doing it in a secure and responsible way, and that should really accelerate what's going on here. Whereas, I think Ian mentioned a moment ago, in past technologies, it's really been seen as like dampening some of those pieces with the security side, and that's not at all what needs to happen here, especially when we talk about it on a global scale with competitors that range from other parts of the world. I think it's really important to be able to make sure that we're deploying this technology even in new innovative ways in a secure manner to allow us to take more risks, to allow us to develop new technologies faster.
And regulation is going to play, you mentioned globally, right? Like regulation is going to play a big role in how some of these organizations who might not yet be stepping up to the plate to really dig into this are sort of forced to. I mean, I know it's not a surprise, I'm sure, to any of us on this call, but that the US is going to be further behind in sort of imposing regulations here because they don't want to stifle innovation. But certainly not true when you look over at like the development around the EU AI Act, and particularly some of the the more recent actions around GDPR, because I think that there's maybe I sort of saw a little bit of a lull where like there hadn't much that had happened with GDPR, and so maybe the regulations weren't going to sort of have the bite in the EU that they may have initially thought, and now I think that tide is changing and those conversations are a little bit more prevalent.
I think, Jed, there too, like even on the regulation side, like, so you see Singapore having a more specific AI security regulation and coverage for some of this versus in like looking at other, Asian countries like India, right, where they're saying we're not going to regulate this at all from a competitive landscape perspective. And you're just seeing some interest there, interesting things. I wonder what the impact of that looks like where people put their data centers, where they put their GPU, where they think about doing that in light of the regulations and what the impact when the US decides it's going to do that. Actually, all of us here have started talking about what we can do to help support a community-driven conversation with the Hill and with lawmakers and others. Ian sounds like he was there this week talking to some of them. And I think we have, a role to play, just like some of the big technology companies that are saying that they want to be a part of this, but frankly will hurt their business. We want to have our point of view there as well. So you'll see more of that, I think, moving forward.
Good question. And Jed, this is kind of in the chat too, where people say, hey, is this different? Is this different than application security? And so a couple things just to, tie on that. So it's not just the four of us saying that it's different. Katie brought this up, Jonathan touched on it, regulation is saying that this is different, on that side. We see MITRE, which is setting up like different frameworks for AI versus attack, in Atlas. They're saying it's different. SPDX and Cyclone DX, that are organizations that set the standards for SBOMs, software bill of materials, say there needs to be a machine learning bill of materials. And then you have things like the AI Security Center that's opening up at the National Security Agency, let alone regulation of 17A3, 17A-4 that's happening in financial services and biotech on this stuff. Like it is happening to say like, hey, we need regulation, we need security, we need to be doing things responsibly. And oh, by the way, this isn't just like every other piece of software that we've been developing. This is something that we got to look at differently because it is different.
And how can we prioritize? I mean, we mentioned kind of, especially with the enterprise business kind of customers, of you need visibility, you need to bring kind of teams together, these various frameworks, NIST and MITRE. I mean, how would an enterprise, or how would you recommend they kind of do next steps, right? Is it you mentioned the kind of the supply chain, application development, and how that translates to the ML world. There's obviously usage through UIs. I mean, what are the kind of the buckets, Katie, kind of you and others talk to your clients about?
Yeah, so I think like where we're seeing our clients being successful in sort of rallying around a centralized or cohesive strategy that's not purely owned by security, but I think everybody here has agreed that security is playing a major role there. And really, like what they're trying to get to is a customized framework, aside from tooling, right? Like which you guys all have more expertise in than I do, right? But they're trying to get to, it's the number one recommendation from NIST to Microsoft. You need a customized framework. In order to do that, you need to understand your threats, means you need to know where your AI is, and you need to know how you're using it, and you need to know the potential threats that you're up against. You need to understand your ecosystem. That's a lot more difficult than I think most people would assume, right, in these large organizations. And you need to understand the regulations and where the regulations are going. And when we see organizations coming around those areas, and really laying that out and getting buy-in from their peers, then they're able to really do something that's customized for their organization. It's going to address their specific threats, that enables them to put controls into place that are really going to mitigate risk. And that's, where I see a lot of energy being spent up front.
And Tito, I see you're off mute here, so you're an easy target. But certainly you need to have customization relative to your risks and use of technology, et cetera. But are there kind of buckets of types of companies that may be more advanced in their usage, or maybe more consumers of OpenAI, et cetera? And related to that, or from that, where should they prioritize their time? Like, where do they start with security? Everyone has limited time, limited budgets, et cetera.
Yeah, I think that there's, and I'll sort of answer those in order. I think that when you talk about sort of the types of organizations that are maybe leaning into this a little bit quicker than others, at least in our experience, it's been the financial institutions, federal government organizations, and then also cybersecurity, as they have some models that are highly exposed that are leading to some other potential major vulnerabilities to get traditional malware paths through. And so I think in the heavier regulated industries, that there's a little bit more of a process for essentially bringing in a new technology and securing it. But I think this is a new flavor. There are certainly new implications here, and I think when it comes to the recommendation side, when I speak with CISOs, I say, look, I'm not asking you to make any new decisions. I'm asking you to apply decisions you've already made to a new technology. And what that means is you need to look at sort of all the different access points. You need to essentially do an assessment like any other. The only real change here is just, this is the fastest growing technology we've ever seen. I mean, there's already a question in the chat about really what is the size of the market here. And I mean, you have predictions ranging from like 15 trillion on up from there by the 2030 mark. And so, it's growing very, very quickly. It's being deployed very, very quickly. And that's creating, these really tight timelines for securing the technology before it starts seeing production. And so, I think that there's certainly a lot of maturity required, but I think it's important that we all sort of sound the alarms and say, we don't actually have that long to make these types of decisions and to actually start putting security in place, because the production side is not slowing down, because these technologies are generating revenue. They're essentially creating. I mean, there's boards clamoring for them, like as Katie mentioned earlier. So I think we sort of have to force ourselves into a more mature position. And I would just really highlight any other new technologies. Again, Katie mentioned the migration to cloud, the expansion in network, other technologies before that. We actually have a lot of blueprints to follow. We just need to embrace that and apply it in this case and move pretty quickly.
Yeah, thank you for that. And there's a lot of questions in the chat. I'm just kind of looking over some of them now, but kind of related to this whole size of market, and really kind of where's the heat map of the market. Ian, what are you seeing? Where are companies either allocating dollars or should be allocating dollars? What parts of this landscape?
Yeah, so a couple things on that. Oftentimes the tailwind has been on LLMs, Gen AI, but once you get in the room, you start to uncover, hey, we have hundreds, if not over 1,000 models that have been deployed across the enterprise. And so that's the day one, that they need to focus on and that they are focusing on. It's like, how do we, ensure that we have security across the models that we have deployed, the models that we are building, the models that are driving digital transformation throughout the enterprise. Those budgets we're seeing are primarily coming out of security. Now, to what Tito stated, we're not saying, hey, do something entirely brand new. We're trying to say what you do over here for all your other code and your development, let's make sure that we cover it for the 20%, the 30% that you're not seeing and you're not doing anything about. And so it really starts to tap into these existing budgets, but we are seeing growth because the mandate, as Katie brought up, it's every board, every CEO is saying, we got to develop AI. We got to deploy this at scale. Therefore, security is now saying, okay, this is happening. Like this is This is a CEO pie moment where it is happening. So therefore we have to secure it. So we are going to see more budgets come up in the next year. Gartner has stated that this particular market, this new market of AI security is going to be 150 million next year. We're already seeing very sizable budgets coming out of the Fortune 1000 companies. And so I think just like what we're seeing in cloud security, infrastructure security, AppSec, we're going to be seeing a lot of those similar things in this brand new category of security, which is the security of AI.
Maybe I can just add that from a services and advisory perspective at KPMG, we have leaned in here. We think that this is it is the future of business, and I'm sure we wouldn't all be sitting here if that wasn't the case. So the things that we're talking about right now as quote unquote AI security, it is going to become the foundational security for everything that we do, because we'll be using AI throughout all aspects of our business. And so, as we're talking about, regulations or market size, really like the sky is the limit, because as it gets more and more embedded into our standard ways of working, it becomes even more essential to the security of our business and the ability to meet business objectives, whether it's integrating it into automating third party or automating the SOC or financial transformation. I mean, there are so many use cases that I think it's a hard thing to really understand, like what that market size is, because if you really laid all those numbers out, I think nobody would believe them.
Especially when we look at some of the adoption in existing technologies that already have sort of established budgets for security. I mean, we look at LLMs starting to replace a good amount of technology in search engines. As we look at even neural networks starting to exist in operating systems, it really becomes sort of we're almost talking about AI security swallowing traditional security in the next decade or so, not the other way around. I think that's a fantastic way to look at it, Katie.
There's been this kind of question, I don't think it's ever been answered, it's more rhetorical, with cloud, right? I mentioned kind of cloud adoption as an analogy of like, hey, is the cloud more secure, kind of less secure than doing it yourself? And it seems like there's a question here around like, is it more secure to develop your own models or more secure to use a third-party service? Does anyone want to take a stance on that?
Yeah. I worked at one of those companies. I won't say which one, but I don't think you can have just implicit trust on adopting AI from a company. You just can't. And I think what's critical in the RFP process is you need to understand, from the vendor, what is the model trained on? What are you doing with my data? What are the open source components that you are utilizing in building the model that we as a customer are consuming, from the vendor? You have to know the bill of materials. You have to, on that side, because the risk of deploying the model or the application, you're then putting your business at risk, your cloud at risk, your infrastructure at risk, your data at risk, your people and your customers and your brand at risk. And so even though in one of my prior roles, my team would meet with 9,000 customers every single quarter, I would say a lot of the customers didn't know the right questions to ask of us. And those are just some of them, is that you have to get really deep with those vendors to understand the ingredients and the recipe and how the AI was baked.
And I would add to that. So, one of the roles I played at KPMG, so I ran, third-party security globally for the firm. And, this problem that you're describing, both from a cloud security perspective and an AI security perspective, is where we are going to see a lot of these breaches coming from. Like, we haven't seen that yet because we are just seeing the introduction of these technologies into these ecosystems so that we can get the visibility necessary, but we will. I think, the cloud has introduced capabilities we haven't seen and speed, and we are going to see third-party breaches continue to persist, and this is all coming together. And so I agree with you. And I think the supply chain piece here is a big deal. I think you have industries that will not develop their own models. They will not have data scientists or ML ops internally. They're going to be almost completely dependent upon third-party services that are getting consumed. Like legal is a good example of that. We worked with a group of legal firms as part of that GRF, and they're going to use these services, which are downstream to their end user clients, like the large banks, and the banks are sending their contracts to these legal firms that are getting reviewed in AI systems, and we don't know where those are. And so these are real world scenarios that people need to get their arms around. And it's not necessarily different than a third-party security risk with the cloud. You still have to worry about where your data is, et cetera. The problem here is that you're starting to see systems that are ultimately going to be recursive and be able to learn over time and build their own capabilities. And we're at the beginning, so we're talking about things as they exist. I think we need to start looking forward as they're going to be driven. And I think Auto GPT is one of those things. We're starting to see multimodal support within, the LLM community now. And like, there's just new use cases that are getting developed that we're seeing introduced every week that people now need to respond to. And it's just going to go faster. And I think we have an opportunity to keep up and keep pace with that.
Yeah, I would actually argue that the decision of whether or not to use like a third-party hosted model or to grow something internally isn't really made on the security side. Security is going to be required in both examples. I think when you're talking about things like where the data needs to reside, how many professionals are even out there. There's an enormous shortage in cybersecurity. There's an enormous shortage in data science. So as you start moving down market, you're going to see more reliability or requirements on the relying on those sort of third-party model hosting sites for you. I think as security professionals, we need to be ready to prepare both to secure both examples. We need to look at securing whether or not it's a transactional or whether or not it's something homegrown, because both are certainly introducing an enormous amount of vulnerability. So the reliance on security is going to be there either way.
And I think the traditional approaches, Jed, so I ran a company called Prevalent before I went to KPMG. It was like in third-party risk, and like it was how we solve that. It can't work any longer, right? Like you can't ask just a questionnaire. It has to be driven inside of the ecosystem. It's got to be driven in the supply chain so that you can go at the same pace and speed. And so I don't think you're going to get any disagreement from the three of us on the product side. And I know Katie has seen some of this directly. But yeah, I just think, we're seeing the pace of this. I think on the software side and the cloud side, the concept of a bill of materials has been tough, right? Especially as you've seen, automation around OSCAL and other things and trying to make that work in production. I think this is gonna be hard. And I think we're gonna have to work diligently to make sure that we have those standards, that those things get persistently developed across the ecosystem, and that we work together here. We're gonna have to work together. It's too big.
I think it's an important piece. I mean, bill of materials have been talked about, SBOMs and the like for a while, but we at least see, for all their kind of warts, SOC 2 was really kind of taken off from a more vendor perspective, as well as like just trust portals. You see that, kind of very often out there. And so it seems logical to me there'll be a, AI version of that, at least for the vendors that are offering an external API service for their models.
Yeah, we agree with that. Yep.
Cool. Any really interesting threats, attacks, breaches that folks are kind of able to share in some kind of way?
I think I know Tito has an interesting one that he's going to bring up because I've heard it before and it's great. I think just to add a different flavor on the question here is the amount of exploits. I knew there were a lot within the supply chain, but as I stated before, we recently acquired a 10,000 person threat research community, and we pointed all 10,000 people at the AI and machine learning supply chain. And as I said, we are finding dozens and dozens of critical, and high vulnerabilities. That's unheard of in some other areas, of software. And so we're going to be seeing more and more of this information come out in the coming weeks and the coming months. But it just shows us how susceptible the AI and the ML supply chain is to attacks, and the bar for hackers to be able to take advantage of it. It's not high. It's the same techniques that they've been doing in other areas of software they can apply here, but the risk is greater on AI because if you think about it, and I'll leave this at, anytime a bank is moving money around, a large financial services institution, a machine learning model is involved. And you're saying a hacker can easily access that model, taint that model, steal that model, inject code in that model that's run every single time? These are real threats, and these threats are happening. They're just not being publicized. Tito, I know you have probably an example.
Well, I mean, you said the most important thing there, which is it's not, we have probably a handful of examples each of some of the attacks we're seeing in the real world, but I would estimate that at far less than 1% of the attacks that are going on. I think, especially when you look at just the before I share the story, especially when you look at how easy it is to conduct these attacks. I mean, there's somewhere around 50 plus automated adversarial machine learning attack tools on GitHub today. I mean, some were developed for the sake of red teaming, but they're just as actionable for actually attacking a model. And so it creates a world where you don't need to be a data scientist, you don't need to be an exploit developer, you really just need the motivation to attack. And there's a tool, an adversarial machine learning as a service option for you, free online. And that's really the trend that we've seen on the ransomware side and other traditional threats. And so it really creates an automation to these attacks. And one of those tools was used with one of our customers that was essentially many of the financial institutions, similarly to money moving around, also with fraud detection, are using machine learning models because they need to be make a significant amount of decisions, and those decisions need to be dynamic for things like the amount of transactions that are happening, the time of day, these types of things. And we saw a scenario where one of our organizations was relying on a machine learning model neural network to detect fraud, but a threat actor went out to the dark web, stole 100 credit cards or so, and started using reinforcement learning driven tools to create these different transactions with different types of things they had access to and control over, like what time of day, what frequency, what amounts, what geos they're sending from using VPN technology. You start to identify, where the fraud transactions are getting flagged and where they aren't, and then ultimately you have the training data to recreate a surrogate of that model. And so with that technique, they were able to then learn things like, are these models trained to or overtrained on things like time of day or certain geographies, and that ultimately, in this case, allowed the threat actor to continue on and really increase their successful fraud transactions by about 800%. And so, you really, then it's not hard to extrapolate that out to things like algorithmic trading or, other use cases where machine learning models are really the only decision-making component on something that's incredibly critical. And again, banks and other large financial institutions are leveraging them there. And then, just as an aside, Hidden Layer was even born out of, we had about 7 different examples of adversarial machine learning activity on our model at a company called Cylance that we were using to essentially replace antivirus. We were using machine learning models to detect threats on Windows environments, and there was adversarial activity to ultimately reverse those models too, to be able to get your malware by without detection. And so, I think that that was in 2019. So these attacks are certainly out there. We just need to start leveraging the technology that our organizations and others provide to be able to be aware of them. I think the last thing I'll say before I hand it off is, I think in security, we've gotten very used to ransomware, which is very loud and in your face. When you've been hit with an attack, nobody isn't aware that they've been hit with a ransomware attack. But if you kind of go pre-ransomware, when you're looking at things like backdoors and rootkits and other threats that you had to go look for to understand if you were attacked, I think that's a little bit more of the game that we're playing right now. And so I think that if your organization is not actively looking for these threats, they're going to be there, and they're going to be exfiltrating data, and they're going to be allowing for executable code to be pivoted off of them, where no one's the wiser.
Certainly a substantial change to the insider threat landscape in terms of, corporate espionage, what people are able to do. I mean, you're not just talking about the ability to sabotage the IP and the future of a company, and you're not just talking about being able to take that for yourself and replicate it, but you're talking about being able to potentially sabotage the data behind the scenes that drives the output of the AI, and in essence, corrupting an entire brand, which I know I keep coming back to the responsible and trusted thing, but it's like why it is really so key, because to your point, it's not as in your face, but actually might be, it's as damaging, if not more so, from a brand perspective.
And Jed, I think, there was an example I was going to give, but one of the problems that we face here is, we built a threat model for a very large pharmaceutical business, and we were able to talk to some of the developers who were developing models. So for instance, things that were coming through, de-identification models that were then going into the surgical arena. And the problem that we faced was we asked the developers of these models, where do you see these threats? Some of the answers we got back were like, this is unethical. Well, what do you mean? Why would anybody attack this? Why would they steal these things? There was not really a good appreciation for what was happening here. So there wasn't really even a willingness to do anything that would enable the security of these systems, because fundamental awareness of these challenges that were just described was not in the data science team. And so we have a fundamental issue, Jed, like those questions you're asking are right. Like one day we'll have in the third party space, it was the Target breach, right? One day there will be some seminal breach and we'll all be talking about it. But fundamentally, when we look at why you're asking that question, it's fundamentally because the people who are responsible for building these don't have the capabilities or the understanding of what these threats look like in a real world setting in their environments and how potentially easy it is, to Ian's point, to take advantage of them. And they haven't done the things necessary to protect themselves. And I think that's what we're facing today. And it's happening very quickly. So there are a lot of examples. I think, again, we point back to MITRE. We're happy to, we all sit in closed door sessions talking about some of these things and in a colloquium and make sure that we're all aware of them. But so there's definitely more, but I think there's fundamental reasons why you're not hearing about it and why it's like why we're here.
And what can change that? Because I think sometimes talk about, new surface area, people talk about IoT, OT security, Colonial Pipeline attack was a big change. But then, someone mentioned ransomware. It was like, 9-10 years between Sony and some of these Vegas casinos last month. So it doesn't seem like a lot's changed. Maybe it's more in the public eye now than it used to be. But what's going to kind of change in AI security? When does it become more real for people?
Maybe I'll start off by saying that I think behind the scenes, while it may appear that nothing has changed, our ability to respond to detect and respond to these attacks has changed significantly. I mean, you're not going to see that in the news blurb, but you definitely see that in terms of the sophistication. And I'm talking about from a, KPMG is within our cyber group has a cyber response team. And so I've seen that develop over the years, and I'm seeing them now respond to AI security events specifically.
And I think we are seeing examples of some of these attacks. I mean, we've seen like Llama 2 recreated for less than $400 worth of credits, and I mean, we've seen and GPT 3.5. I mean, we're seeing a lot of them. I think a lot of folks need to start understanding what this even means. And it's our job to even sort of share, one of the challenges we all face is, as John mentioned, is like, we get into these closed door meetings with Chatham House rules and we share a lot of what's going on. But, we need some of these, like we've saw in traditional cyber where nobody wants to raise their hand and tell all their shareholders how they were attacked. But we do need to start sharing a lot of this information in the most responsible way possible, because many organizations, including the ones we work with, are experiencing some of these attacks. They're not under any obligation on the policy side or have any internal motivation to start telling everybody that they've been hit with them. So I think a little bit of it is a requirement on the policy side to treat it like any other breach, or whether it's the responsible, at fault, whether it's through an MLOps pipeline or whether it's through like, a network database, the damage is equal to the end user and to the shareholder. So I think we need to do a much better job of requiring organizations to, let the public and their shareholders know when a breach has even taken place.
And Jed, I think conversations like this help. Like, I think doing what you're doing, getting us all together, talking about it, opening up the dialogue and making sure that there's more awareness, I think it absolutely helps. So thank you.
Yeah, doesn't hurt to have on-call agreements. Make sure you have someone to call if something goes wrong.
Yeah. Education is super important. Attacks are happening. They're just not as publicized, as maybe all of us think maybe they should be. Policy is going to change that. But companies are receptive right now to security of AI. And they're diving in, and they're diving deep, and they're trying to affect change in culture, in systems, in processes across their organizations.
I think that's a good optimistic note to end on. You're saying the companies are leaning in. What I'm hearing from multiple of you guys have already met, you guys have talked, you're taking the industry forward. So I think that gives me a lot of kind of optimism in the face of what we kind of see in the press and some other conversations. I'm excited for that. This is an amazing set of panelists. Ravi, thank you for organizing this series and particularly this topic. I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Jed, and really appreciate the time of all the panelists here, sharing kind of whatever you can, and especially the audience for all the amazing kind of questions. Many of them didn't get answered. So we hope we could do another event sometime, maybe 6-9 months from now. We'll see kind of what's the state of AI security. Thank you all for joining today.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.